Pipistrol is a really innovative, established company with a track record. It's got a great, well-trained creative staff. And if Cessna wants kind of a ready-made electric powertrain system, well, Pipistrol's got it.
That's Paul Bertorelli talking about Textron's acquisition of Pipistrol. Today he answers the question, why did Textron purchase Pipistrol, and just what does it mean? Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Truscott. Last week in episode 224, we talked with Catherine Cavagnaro about whether to use pitch or power to control landing speed. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/224. This week after the news, we'll talk with Paul Bertorelli about the many facets of why Textron purchased Pipistrol, and it's not as simple as you may think. Later, we'll also have some of your emails and comments. Thanks so much for sending those, as I love hearing from you. And this is a listener-supported show, and we're still ad-free. So please join us. Sign up to become a member and support the show financially at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. And when you do, I'll read your name on the show. This week in the news, a pilot is on trial for fraud for the 737 MAX crashes. Commercial seaplane travel is coming back to 2 major U.S. cities. And finally, you may soon be able to join the 20 Mile High Club. All this and more, and the news starts now. From Textron.com, Textron to acquire electric aircraft pioneer Pipistrol. Textron, home to Cessna, Beechcraft, and Bell Aviation brands, announced it's entered into an agreement to purchase Pipistrol, an award-winning pioneer and global leader in electric-powered aircraft based in Slovenia and Italy. With Textron, Pipistrol will have access to greater resources, technical and regulatory expertise, and a global aircraft sales and support network, enabling it to accelerate its development and certification of electric and hybrid electric aircraft. Upon closing of the transaction, Textron plans to form a new business segment, Textron eAviation, focused on the development of sustainable aircraft, which will include Pipistrol. Textron Chairman and CEO Scott Donnelly said Pipistrol puts Textron in a uniquely strong position to develop technologies for the sustainable aviation market and develop a variety of new aircraft to meet a wide range of customer missions. Today's announcement supports Textron's long-range strategy to offer a family of sustainable aircraft for urban air mobility, general aviation, cargo, and special mission roles. And right after the news, we'll be talking with Paul Bertorelli about just what all this means for general aviation. From abcnews.com, Boeing ex-pilot's trial starts on fraud charges over 737 MAX. A former Boeing test pilot is on trial on charges of misleading regulators about the Boeing 737 MAX, the model involved in 2 deadly crashes. Lawyers paint ex-Boeing pilot Mark Forkner as a scapegoat. Federal prosecutors said Friday that a former Boeing test pilot lied to regulators about changes to a critical flight control system on the 737 MAX to reduce the cost of pilot training and save the company tens of millions of dollars. However, a defense lawyer said Boeing engineers kept Mark Forkner in the dark about changes to the system, which played a role in 2 crashes that killed 346 people. Forkner is the former chief technical pilot for Boeing and later a pilot at Dallas-based Southwest Airlines. On Monday, an FAA regulator who helped certify the 737 MAX said she felt bullied by Forkner as his company pushed for lower training standards on the aircraft. Stacy Klein, who headed the FAA group in Seattle in charge of training levels for the plane as it was being developed, said Forkner would get irritated, red-faced, raise his voice at me during meetings, and slam his hands down on the table. Federal prosecutors led off their case Monday by calling U.S. DOT investigator Kent Byers to verify emails and messages between Forkner and employees at Boeing. They want to establish that Forkner knew about critical changes to the MCAS software as regulators were trying to determine pilot training standards. Forkner went to trial in U.S. District Court in Fort Worth on 4 charges of fraud. He is the only person facing criminal charges in the case. Based on court filings by both sides, the trial is likely to feature testimony from technical experts and also internal Boeing communications to shed light on discussions about the MAX inside the company. Prosecutors will also attempt to use Forkner's own text messages against him, especially one in which he said, quote, "So I basically lied to the regulators," and then in parentheses, unknowingly. Defense attorney David Gerger said his side will show jurors that Boeing engineers withheld information from Forkner, and it wasn't Forkner who set out to save the company money by minimizing pilot training requirements. That objective came down directly from Boeing's board of directors, he said. Gerger said, quote, in March of 2016, Boeing engineers changed MCAS and they decided who to tell, but they did not tell Mr. Forkner. For root causes that had nothing to do with him, a plane went down in Indonesia and then in Ethiopia. Forkner's defense team said changes were made to the 737 MAX software system after he talked to regulators, and he was never notified. They questioned potential jurors about whether they understood the phrase scapegoat. Judge Reed O'Connor said the trial could last a week or more. It also could reveal scathing details about Boeing and how it handled the damaging crisis. Boeing has already agreed to pay $2.5 billion in a legal settlement over the 737 MAX crisis and established a $500 million fund to compensate the family members of victims of the two crashes. From avweb.com, new airport alerts show danger hotspots. The FAA is drawing up a set of airport flashcards aimed at preventing pilots from landing on the taxiways or the wrong runway. The arrival alert notices will be published in the May 19th charting cycle and will be included along with the regular information for 11 busy small to medium-sized facilities across the country. Quote, the FAA has taken a number of steps to address wrong surface events, but there is still a need to provide a more permanent awareness of these events, especially to GA pilots who comprise 83% of wrong surface events, the agency said in a news release. The alerts include a pilot's eye view of a 1-mile final for the runways that cause the most problems. The alerts will include hotspot standardized symbology that will use 3 standardized shapes to alert pilots to dangerous areas of the airport. A cylinder-shaped outline will denote airport surface hotspots, while circles or ellipses will denote ground movement hotspots. Many wrong surface events occur during the daytime and in visual meteorological conditions, and the majority of the time the pilot has read back the correct landing or departure clearance, the announcement said. AANs can serve as an additional planning and awareness tool for pilots. From GeneralAviationNews.com, commercial pilot course with reduced hours introduced. AeroGuard Flight Training Center has introduced its new FAA-approved reduced hours commercial pilot course. The new course, developed in-house at AeroGuard by its team of flight instructors, has been specially reviewed and approved by the FAA, according to company officials, who note the new course meets, quote, the same high-quality standards in a lower number of flight hours than is typically necessary for a commercially rated pilot. As part of commercial pilot training, the FAA sets certain flight hour requirements, and for students training in a Part 61 setting, which is typically less structured, this is 250 hours of total flight time and simulator time. In a more structured Part 141 environment, these hours are decreased to 220. AeroGuard's new reduced hours course has been approved at 165 total hours, according to company officials. The new course is available for students who join with zero flight experience at one of AeroGuard Flight Training Center's 4 campuses in Arizona, Texas, and Florida. Learn more at flyaeroguard.com. From multiple sources, including LeDauphine.com and BreakingLatest.news, the remains of 79-year-old ferry pilot Denny Craig have been recovered from a Cirrus that crashed in the French Alps last week. The single-engine aircraft, missing since last Friday within a large area on both sides of the border between France and Italy, was found on last Monday following overflights carried out by 3 Italian search helicopters. The remains of the aircraft were semi-submerged in snow on the side of a mountain at approximately 2,800 meters, which would be about 9,200 feet. It's possible that due to the bad weather that was raging throughout the area on Friday, the U.S. pilot at the controls did not have time to correct his course and crashed into the side of the mountain. The crashed aircraft was identified at high altitude despite the night snowfall, but recovery operations were suspended due to the risk of avalanches. The firefighters attempted to lower a team of rescuers in the impact area with the winch, but it was impossible to operate for recovery since the impact occurred under a gully at high risk of avalanches after the recent snowfalls at the base of the Moulinet Glacier. The South African registered SR20 took off from Cuneo International Airport in Italy. It was en route to Geneva, Switzerland, and would have continued on to Ostend, Belgium, and then to Scotland on a ferry flight to the U.S. The pilot had not filed a flight plan, nor was he required to, but had to land in Geneva to refuel and then continue to Scotland as part of a journey that started in South Africa. And this report comes from Mike Gray of White Rose Aviation. He says, Denny William Craig, it is with great sadness that I have to report a fallen eagle. It appears that Denny had an accident in Italy on March the 11th. Recovery operations are underway, but they are being hampered by adverse weather conditions. I had worked with Denny for over 35 years, and I was assisting him with this ferry flight from South Africa to the U.S. Denny was extremely well known on the aircraft ferry circuit and had a bulging logbook, some 70,000 flying hours, I believe. My thoughts are with his family and his friends at this difficult time. From thebostonglobe.com, seaplane service returns between Boston and New York. Tailwind Air will be resuming its Boston-New York seaplane service this year, and this time it will offer a full season of trips. Tailwind brought seaplane service back to Boston Harbor for the first time in decades last year, but it was for a truncated 4-month season. This time around, the service will begin on March 21st and continue until the end of November. One-way tickets will range in price from $395 to $795. That makes them more expensive than comparable flights on major airlines, but Tailwind CEO Alan Ram said his company offers a more convenient, faster way to fly between the two cities. The trips last under 90 minutes from downtown to downtown. On the Boston side, passengers will board on a shuttle boat either at Fan Pier or Rose Wharf and taxi out to a floating dock in the harbor near Logan Airport. In New York, passengers disembark at the seaplane dock at East 23rd Street. Tailwind plans to offer 3 outbound trips from Boston each weekday, as well as 3 inbound trips, and also will offer a late Sunday flight with the hope to add more service in the warmer months. Ram said he initially expected the vast majority of flights last year to be for business travel, but at least half were leisure trips. The company flies 8-passenger amphibious Cessna Caravans staffed with 2 pilots. From NBCNewYork.com, drugs smuggled where controls, wires are kept put airplanes at risk. Inspections have revealed kilos of cocaine found jammed into the electronic bays of several passenger flights, right where the wiring for the aircraft is, according to Customs and Border Protection. Drug smugglers are putting passenger jets at risk, as federal investigators in recent weeks have uncovered cocaine shipments hidden in secure electronic bays of some planes. It has happened on several flights into the New York area, including recently on American Airlines and JetBlue, with pilots operating passenger jets completely unaware of what was sitting beneath them amid their controls and wires. Inspections revealed kilos of cocaine found jammed into the electronic bays of several passenger flights, right where the wiring for the aircraft is, according to Frank Russo, the head of Customs and Border Protection for New York's airports. Quote, "What we've seen here in the last year alone is over 30 kilos of cocaine and heroin in the avionics section of the airplane," he said. He said some airplanes get grounded because smugglers damage critical wires while rushing to conceal bricks of cocaine. Quote, "We know that these are individuals that don't care about the safety of the passengers that are flying," he said. Officials say the international flights in question can originate out of Latin America and the Caribbean. At JFK Airport, Customs uses a specially trained officer, an airplane mechanic himself, to carry out drug searches in critical parts of the plane. Homeland Security investigations said that at airports overseas, the drug cartels pay insiders to get drugs onto planes, and after landing in the U.S., others are paid to retrieve the hidden drugs. Experts say an avionics base secretly packed with illegal drugs could damage important controls. Aviation expert Captain John Cox said, quote, "You could lose communication radios or autopilot computer flight control computers, but a pilot or pilot losing total control midair is still unlikely. I would say that it could certainly cause a diversion, because if you start losing multiple systems, you don't really necessarily know the immediate cause, so you need to get on the ground," Cox said. Officials said smuggling in an avionics compartment is rare, certainly compared to other sections of a plane. Other common smuggling areas include the cargo hold in suitcases or shipments, as well as on board, hidden in life jackets under seats or hidden behind panels in other parts of the cabin. From KOMU.com, Missouri pilots come together for the first annual food flight. GA pilots from across Missouri came together for the first ever food flight. Columbia Air Traffic Control and Columbia Jet Center hosted the food drive. "It's a nice day, organizer Cole Finley said. Why not try something that ends up benefiting everyone in and around central Missouri?" Finally said pilots flew from Bethany, Chesterfield, and Fort Leonard Wood, among other places, to the Columbia Regional Airport. "I think the food bank said that each container holds around 120 pounds, Finley said. 3 or 4 are full so far, and that's just in a couple hours. Finley said there is not a specific goal for how much food they'll donate. However, he said every canned good counts. It could be, 1 can of green beans, or it could be, 1,000 pounds of food, Finley said. Just whoever decides to, take their time, hop in their airplane, drive to the airport, getting their plane to fly all the way over here. While this is the first time he's executed the event, he hopes to do it at least once a year. Maybe biannually, Finley said. Maybe something before the holiday season for those that need canned food or turkey or anything. All proceeds from the event will go to the food bank for Central and Northeast Missouri. And from JacksonHoleAirport.com, Jackson, Wyoming Airport to be closed for 78 days this spring. KJAC's runway is in need of a full reconstruction. The last time the runway was fully reconstructed was in the 1970s. The asphalt runway at JAC has been rehabbed 4 times since it was originally constructed in the late 1970s, and it is due for a total reconstruction this spring, which will include a 78-day runway closure. The runway will be closed for reconstruction from April 11th through June 27th of 2022. Commercial air service to and from Jackson, Wyoming will resume on June 28th, 2022. There will be no flight operations at Jackson or Jackson Hole Aviation during the 78-day closure. The National Forest Service Helitack base will remain operational throughout the closure. Now, I flew into this beautiful airport just a week ago in a Vision jet and shot a lot of video of our ILS approach into runway 19, which occurred at sunset, and I'll tell you later how you can see that video. And finally, in the news from Tucson.com, Tucson-based Worldview shows off passenger capsule for stratotourism. Tucson-based Worldview Enterprises has unveiled new details of its balloon-borne capsule designed to take tourists on stratospheric cruises starting in 2024. And judging by the company's plans, the balloon trips will be a lot more relaxing and deluxe than the brief rides to space and back that Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic are offering. Worldview debuted its new spaceflight capsule prototype last week with a full-size exterior mock-up of the capsule at a business expo that is part of South by Southwest, the week-long compendium of media and music festivals and conferences held annually in Austin, Texas. The company also shared new renderings of the interior of the aircraft. The exterior of the Worldview space capsule is shaped like a faceted hexagon with softened edges and oversized windows, while the inside features paired seating for 8 passengers plus a pilot and concierge. The capsule is climate-controlled and pressurized, with an entire interior designed to maximize space, allowing passengers to move freely about the capsule during balloon-powered flights that will reach 100,000 feet and last 6 to 12 hours before the craft is piloted back to Earth by parachute. Food and beverage service will be offered aloft, and the capsule features a restroom. Passengers won't experience the weightlessness of space, but they will get to see stratospheric sights like the curvature of the Earth and the line that marks the beginning of the vacuum of space. Ryan Hartman, president and CEO of Worldview, said, "Unveiling our space capsule prototype is a pivotal moment for the company as we continue to prepare for our first launch from the Grand Canyon in just 2 short years." The company plans manned test flights in 2023 and is taking $500 deposits for flight tickets that cost $50,000 each on its website, worldview.space. That's the news for this week. Coming up next, Paul Bertorelli talks about Textron's acquisition of Pipistrol and what it all means. And then more of your feedback and questions, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And during the news, I mentioned the video I shot going into Wyoming in the Vision Jet. People who are signed up as members of this show at the $20 and up level have already seen that video. If you'd like to see it, head on out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome and sign up to support the show. Now let me tell you a little bit about Paul Bertorelli. Paul is editor-at-large for Belvoir Media Group and avweb.com. He's a CFII and ATP, and he lives in Florida. And now here's our conversation with Paul Bertorelli. Paul, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, so last week, Textron announced that they were purchasing Pipistrol. On the scale of 1 to 10, how big a deal is this in the GA world?
You know, it's hard to judge it looking into the future. I don't think it's as big as we think it is because the electric airplane market is the electric airplane market. And Textron hasn't really been in a position to drive the piston market much. Cirrus is still the leading manufacturer of pistons, certainly in terms of units, if not dollars. So that electric market will mature at whatever pace it's going to mature. And it's not a question of having the products because the products just can't be built yet.
And you're talking about the electric products not being able to be built because of what, certification or technology?
Well, they're not fully functional airplanes. We're still up against pretty hard battery limitations. We keep hearing that we're going to turn a corner soon, and that corner keeps receding. So it's eventually going to happen, but it's not a near-term transition from what we can tell now. Because if you look at the Pipistrel Velis, which is as good as any airplane out there, if not the only electric airplane out there, it's basically a 50-minute airplane. So you would know from your own flight training, that's not really very practical. And it's certainly not practical to be a mass production trainer for the airline market. It just doesn't have that capability. And that will improve, but I don't think it will be a short-term thing.
So for people who are not totally familiar with the players, tell us a little bit about Textron first.
Textron is a industrial conglomerate. Its origins go back to the 1920s when it was a textile company. Today, it's about $12 to $13 billion company. It's about 265 on the Fortune 500. It's got several divisions. Of course, the aviation division has Cessna and Beechcraft. They have an industrial division that does golf carts and airport tow trucks and that sort of thing. They have a systems division, which is, I guess, their would-be defense division. It has a small, funny-looking remote robotic tank called the Ripsaw, and they make a drone called the Shadow. So that's kind of their foray into the defense world. And then they've got a finance division. I guess it does finance products. So Pipistrol, the way they've announced it would be a separate division called eAviation. And whether that appears as a separate division or goes under one of the others, industrial or systems, we don't know yet. Not that I think that it necessarily matters much.
I looked at some of the numbers. The division with Cessna and Beechcraft are about 34% of the company. Bell's 28%, industrials 26%, which includes snowmobiles. The Textron systems, the defense systems, just 11%. Finance is 1%. So that's really just to help finance people who are buying Cessnas and things like that. Well, Pipistrel is probably more interesting in a lot of different ways. Tell us about Pipistrel. I think you've been associated with, or rather you've kind of known of them for quite some time.
Yeah, I first went to Slovenia, I think it was in 2006 or 7. The company had been going since then. It was founded by Ivo Boscarel. And understand where Slovenia is. People confuse it with Slovakia, but Slovakia is further east. So Slovenia is immediately east of Italy across the Italian border. It's right on the border. It used to be part of Yugoslavia. And when Yugoslavia was broken up, that would have been early 90s, I guess, or maybe a little before that. Slovenia turned out to be the most prosperous country of that group. And I believe it's the only one that's in the EU because of its prosperity. Small country, 2 million is population. I mean, it's the size of Nebraska or something in terms of population. So Ivo Boscarel was always interested in aviation. And during the early days when he started to fly, he's 65 years old, you couldn't legally do that in then Yugoslavia. So they used to do it on the sly at night and at dusk. And I think that's where they get the name Pipistrel from, because Pipistrel means bat, and that's their logo. So he was active in flying gliders and hang gliders and that sort of thing. And he just kept that interest up. And as the market opened up and they joined the EU and Slovenia got ever more prosperous, Pipistrel took off as a aircraft manufacturer. Today, it's, going by memory here, a couple hundred people. Slovenian press reported a revenue around $40 million or so. They don't do that many airplanes. It's fairly low volume. According to Gamma numbers, they're under 30 a year. They've had some higher years and some lower years. And they've got a factory in a town in Slovenia just across the Italian border called Adostina. And then they have a new factory on the Italian side, a place called Gricia, which is a brand new state-of-the-art factory. And they did that because they needed more capacity and more volume capability. And they also needed to assemble the airplanes in Italy, because even though they're part of the EU, they don't have the bilaterals that Italy has. So I believe they did that to kind of ease the approvals in other countries for these airplanes.
It's surprising that they sell so few airplanes, given that they seem to have a number of models. I find it a little bit confusing trying to sort out the different models. Tell us about the different range of aircraft that they sell.
Well, they don't have a wide range of models. The primary product line is the Cirrus, and they have four versions of that, I think, based on horsepower. And then based on that, they also have the Alpha Trainer, which may be their main seller, and that's sold into the training market. They've got the Velis Electric. They still have the Alpha Electro, which was the second generation electric airplane. I don't know if they're going to continue that in the line or replace it with the Velis. Of course, Velis is certified. And then they've got the Panthera, which is a four-place high-performance airplane, not certified yet. And then they've got, the last time I was there in 2019, they had a fair amount of military work, which I assume to be drones. They had, Evo showed me a new building they'd bought, which was a big box windowless, and he said that was the military contracting side. And my suspicion is that they're doing a lot of research, if not manufacturing, in low observability drones, because they're very good at that kind of stuff. The thing about Slovenia is it is a highly educated population. I mean, if you go into a gas station, the gas station attendant speaks perfect English. I mean, it's really very impressive. So the company has been able to build itself around that high level of education. And if you go into the engineering spaces there at Pipistrol, it's all state-of-the-art stuff. And, they're very capable people. They are somewhat vertically integrated in that they do a lot of their own engineering of components, engineering manufacture of components in-house.
And I also see that they've announced the Explorer, which is a two-seat. So in addition to the Cirrus, they show the Velis, the Cetus. Of course, you mentioned the Alpha, the Panthera, and I'm sure there's a lot of overlap. It's not clear to me which of these models are actually for sale or which are under development.
Yeah, I think they're listed, but not necessarily under manufacture. I see that they're on the website currently. They've got 4 models of the Cirrus.
And I think one of the interesting things about the designs is just how aerodynamic they are. Do you want to talk briefly about how they won the various CAFE awards in past years?
Because they were involved in gliders, and Italy and Slovenia are big glider areas for glider sports with clubs and so forth, and they've got the Julian Alps there, so they do a lot of flying in the Alps, and they're absolutely beautiful. So they have this history of building gliders, which of course are low drag, and because of Evo's interest in what we call sustainable aviation, which in those days they called green, they participated in a number of CAFE events, and the big one was the NASA Green Challenge of, can't remember the year, it was a while ago. They won that with a design, an interesting design that was a 2 fuselage boom type design, and they really blew the competition away on that for efficiency. It was really an impressive thing for a small company. And so they've continued that work. They've continued to be involved in all kinds of high efficiency flight. In Europe, they have something called the Clean Skies Initiative, and the European Union has funneled money into research in green aviation, and so they've done quite a bit of research in that area. They developed a couple of hybrid designs, which they haven't flown yet, but they've got them running. I don't know if they're what the testing plans for those is, but all that stuff spills over into their manufacturing and production on the plant floor. And the airplanes themselves are small, light, very efficient. And we would know these airplanes as LSAs. They're known as either ultralights or microlights. And for their size and power, they're pretty quick and they're pretty economical.
Were you surprised that Pipistrel sold?
I was, because I know it's a labor of love for Evo. I've known him for 15 years, I guess, and but the last time I was there, I spent most of a day with him. We rode around in his car, and he said something that kind of got my attention. He said, this being a pioneer is really wearing at times. It's really very difficult, and he didn't use the word tiring, but I sort of sensed that. So I didn't feel that he was reaching the end of his interest in it, but maybe Textron made a deal he couldn't refuse, and decided that was a good time to go.
So which technologies and products do you think Textron is most excited about getting from Pipistrel, and what do you make of them creating a separate business unit for this company?
I can only guess. I mean, this is an informed guess. I can't get inside the heads of the managers at Textron. They have their own reasons, which they may be holding close to the vest, or they may have explained it in their press release. But my take on it is they want to expand the systems division and get more defense contracting. And man, that is going to be drones. That's what's happening. That's where the action is. If you look at what's going on in Ukraine today, this is a drone war, and he with the best drones is going to be the victor. And Pipistrel is really good at that stuff because they're very creative. They've been doing it a while, and all of that airplane work they do really transfers directly into low observable or any kind of drone. So that, my guess would be, that's what they're most interested in. Secondarily, although I would be surprised to see them go both barrels into electric airplanes or manned airplanes and trainers, I think they want to have a position on it, as everyone probably should. Diamond, for example. They don't have anything. It wouldn't make any sense for them to develop in-house when other companies are already out there with a presence and have done the research. And I don't think they'd be very good at it anyway, to tell you the truth, because it's not an innovative company. It's just not. You don't see innovation coming out of Cessna or out of Beechcraft. They're basically a legacy company. They're stamping out airframes, and they're making whatever profit they can on those, whereas Pipistrel is a really innovative, established company with a track record. It's got a great, well-trained, creative staff. And if Cessna wants kind of a ready-made electric powertrain system, well, Pipistrel's got it. They've developed it. Now, it's certainly not ready for prime time in the U.S. or Europe, for that matter. But I mean, we're just starting out here. So this electric airplane thing is not going to go away. It's going to continue to progress. So, and Pipistrel is way out in front on it. I mean, this is their third generation of electric airplanes. That's significant. And as far as making it a separate division, it could be that they're making it a separate division for legal liability reasons. That's my guess. And maybe they understand in order to get any value out of the purchase, they really need to keep it separate from as much as they can from corporate headquarters, because regardless of what the CEO might imagine he wants, the middle ranks, the C-suites will figure a way to grind it up. It's a small company. It reminds me of something that Rhett Ross told me. Rhett Ross was then CEO of Continental. They bought Matituck, which was a well-known, highly respected engine shop, Continental Lycoming engine shop out on Long Island, Matituck, Long Island. And I bought a couple engines there. Great shop. And for whatever reason, they thought it would be a good idea to buy it. Well, they did that, and they ran it into the ground, and it folded. And so all of a sudden, we had one less good engine shop in the Northeast. And he later told me, he said, we just didn't know how to run it. We thought we did. We didn't know how to run it. And we ran it into the ground. It's that simple. So Textron faces the same problem, I'm sure. And if they keep it physically separated in a separate division, maybe there's a lower chance of that happening. I mean, if it were me, I would just use it as a technology incubator and let the numbers run where they run, because Textron divisions are famous for being held to their quarterly performance. I don't think that's going to work in a small little entrepreneurial company like Pipistrol. But maybe they understand that, maybe they don't. But they are not moving it to Wichita as Cessna did with Columbia, which of course completely destroyed it.
Is there any type of eVTOL play in here? Certainly there are probably 200 companies out there developing eVTOLs. Does Pipistrol have the kind of technology that Textron might leverage to get into that market if they chose?
Oh, they absolutely do. They did develop one. If you recall back about 2017, maybe 2018, when Uber was big in its Elevate project, they were going to set the world on fire with urban air mobility. And so they engaged a number of companies, not as contractors, I think, more as like RFPs. And Pipistrel was one of these. And they developed might have been a 4-passenger eVTOL that was meant to be for the urban air mobility market. And when I was there in 2019, we spent some time talking about this. They had been working on it. The scales had been removed from their eyes on that market. They didn't think it was going to happen. And certainly it's not happening with Uber, because Uber sold the idea to Joby. So they certainly have that capability. They are developing an unmanned cargo variant based on a similar idea. It's actually a hybrid. Uses, I think, a Rotax engine, which is really about the only way it's ever going to work for the short term. So yeah, there's a possibility there. They can certainly do that work. Question is there a market there? And is a company like Textron willing to get into that market where you might do 50 a year or 100 a year? Maybe.
It seems to me that Pipistrol has always been strong on the technology and perhaps a little bit less so on the marketing and sales. Is there an opportunity for Textron to help them develop their sales arm and to sell more aircraft into, for example, the flight school market?
That's a really good question. There are two ways to look at it. One is that Cessna's not doing great with sales now, right? I mean, they sell into the legacy market. They probably have a half to 2/3 of it. Piper's got the rest, and Diamond's got some. But they're not really very aggressive about it. And if you look at the Cessna sales and production numbers, they're not particularly impressive. They're around 100 172s a year and some 182s and some 206s. So it's not big volume. And that tells me a couple things. One, it tells me they're not really that interested in it, and they realize it has limits. And the other thing is that there's just not a lot of expansion to be had there, no matter how good they are at selling. So now you come along with a really quirky airplane like the Alpha Trainer or the Velis, for that matter. Small, very light, very lightly constructed. Flight schools have not warmed up to them because they're just not durable. If you have ever stood on the ramp and watched Embry-Riddle operate or UND operate, they flail the hell out of those airplanes. I mean, they fly them 7 to 9 hours a day. That's going to be difficult to do with the Pipistrel style airplanes. Now, do they see maybe a clean sheet airplane that's electric? Maybe. I guess that's possible. But it wouldn't be the Velis, I don't think. I just don't think that's a player.
Yeah, years ago I looked at the Cessna numbers, and about 90% of the revenue came from jets. The Caravan was about another 5%, and then all of the other pistons combined were somewhere around 4 to 5% of Cessna's total revenue.
Yeah, well, traditionally it's been 3 to 4, and then a couple percent for support. So it's coffee money at Textron. And I don't even know why they still stay in it, considering what their expectations are on return on investment. It could be just flag waving, or maybe it's related to what they think the jet market has to do with it. I don't know. But if they want to go in that direction, so they've got Pipistrel, they've got a solid core to do that. They've got a highly developed third generation electric powertrain, which can be taken to the next step, whatever that is, when the batteries improve.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that this purchase is much more about either technology, defense business, possibly eVTOL, and less about getting flight school sales out of alpha trainers.
Yeah. But, again, I as I say, it's just an informed guess. I could be completely wrong. They could have something else in mind. I guess, we'll know in a couple of years, see what comes out of there.
Do you think this is the beginning of the consolidation of the electric aircraft market? And if so, who do you think some of the likely acquirers and acquisition targets will be?
I don't think it's a consolidation, because I don't think the market has declared itself yet, because we have all of these eVTOL. I mean, there are more than 100 out there. For a while there, we were reporting on a new one every week. And the use cases I don't see are there yet, and they may never be. The primary use case, at least for Joby, is UAM. I don't think UAM is a real thing. I think it's going to happen, and there will be urban air mobility, but not at the numbers they imagine. But you got all these players in there. So now what? Who's going to come along and snap those up against a future play into a market that is really very uncertain? So we've got, if you look at the major players now, so now Textron is nominally involved in electric airplanes. Diamond did the right thing and hired another company to basically electrify the DA-40, so they've got a position. That leaves Cirrus. As far as I know, they don't have anything going, but that just because I don't know it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But those companies will have to see a potential market there, and we're not there yet. And I'm agnostic on all of this. I'm not bearish. I just think it's going to take a while to develop it.
Do you think Buy Aerospace is more attractive now that Pipistrol has been sold, and is that a possible matchup with Cirrus?
That's a good question too. I'm running a poll right now on AvWeb that basically asks, does the Textron purchase validate electric airplanes? And I looked at it a little while ago, and one of the questions was, Pipistrel doesn't need validation. They're already on the map. And I think 40% of the people thought that was the case, and it's pretty much what I think. Because people can make a huge mistake and look at, well, if Textron is in this, it must be serious, right? And therefore, the stock of electric airplane goes up. But that's really the wrong way to look at it. You still have to look at the limitations and what the potential market will be. And, Buy Aerospace has an interesting airplane, but show me that you are actually using batteries that are at 300 watt hours per kg, and that this is really a 3-hour airplane. Show me that. Show me that it's a 3-hour airplane and you can charge it in 20 minutes. Because if you can do that and you can demonstrate it and the airplane is durable, you got a winner. I think, in fact, you'd have a winner with somewhat less than that. But right now it's all on paper. It's we see the press releases of schools interested in buying it, but they can't buy it because it doesn't exist yet.
Well, as we start to wrap up, any other thoughts about the Pipistrol acquisition or about electric aircraft in general?
I really cover electric airplanes a lot, and not many people do in aviation journalism. I'm not quite sure why. I believe they're coming. I have no doubt about that, but I just try to keep it real and how fast they're going to come and what their capabilities are, and so in that sense, if Textron doesn't do to Pipistrel what Cessna did to Columbia, it's a good thing, because Pipistrel will probably get some funding, which they could use to accelerate development on electrics and also maybe certify the Pantera. So that's a good thing. On the downside, how big companies are. They're like an elephant rolling over in bed, and you can get squashed. So all we can do is watch them and see what happens.
And does the eVTOL frenzy and the nearly 200 companies that are in it now in any way remind you of the hype around VLJs about around the year 2000?
Yeah. VLJs? I know that term, right? And that just completely went away, didn't it? Bert Rutan once told me this is the height of the VLJ craze, which is around 2004. I called him up one day, and we're talking about the technology shift that made VLJs possible. And so, how many of these do you see being produced? He said 20,000 a year. I said, we're going to have a parking problem. Of course, that never materialized. It wasn't even 2,000 a year. So it had that bubble to it. On the eVTOL side, nobody's rushing out to buy them, but dozens of companies are rushing out to create them. So the bubble is kind of, I guess it's a supply side bubble. So do I think it'll go the same way? Yeah. There'll be a huge, horrible shakeout, and then it'll settle down to whatever use cases there are. And there will be some. There will absolutely be some.
Yeah, I agree. There will be some survivors, but out of the 200 companies, I think we're going to see billions and billions of venture capital just kind of left on the wayside.
Yeah. Joby's really the one to watch, because it's got a lot of capital flowing into it. And if you were betting on success, you'd bet on that one, but that doesn't, it might not even be 50-50.
Well, a lot of interesting things in the years ahead to talk about. Can I ask you to come join us again sometime as things develop?
Sure. Happy to do it.
Great. And where do people go to read more of your work?
Mainly on AvWeb. That's www.avweb.com. And, of course, we have a YouTube channel, but the two are linked. So what you see on one, you see on the other. And we're now doing a daily news feed, and we do a lot of features and in-depth reporting on all aspects of aviation.
Paul, thanks so much for joining us here today.
My pleasure. Happy to do it.
And my thanks to Paul Bertorelli for joining us today. Toward the end of the conversation, we were talking about VLJs. That stands for Very Light Jets, and that was a market that was going to sell thousands and thousands of units, and very few of them actually got sold. You'll find links to AvWeb and their YouTube channel in our show notes. Coming up next, your feedback and questions, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let's go to the good news department. First up, congratulations to new mega supporter Don Jones, who recently passed his instrument rating. Congratulations, Don, and thanks for supporting the show. And also congratulations to PayPal supporters Dan Clapp, who passed his commercial rating. And let's move on to some of your email. This comes from Patreon supporter Larry Noe. He says, just watch your video flying into Jackson Hole on the Vision Jet. Spectacular. And the Vision Jet looks so cool. Question, any reason you didn't use VNAV on the approach into Jackson? I'm not familiar with the G3000, but in my SR22T, I would have armed VNAV and put in the lowest altitude, and it would have taken me down on the VNAV profile. Just curious. Thanks for the podcast and these videos. Love them all. Well, Larry, my recollection is that on this particular case, the clearance that we were given was inconsistent with the altitudes to cross, at least at the first point. Now, we could have gone in and fixed that particular altitude, but for whatever reason, we chose just to use vertical speed mode, and then we continued to use it after we passed that first waypoint that didn't match what the ATC instructions were. By the way, I have found that to be the case quite often, that the instructions that I'm given when IFR are inconsistent with what VNAV would fly. And so I find most of the time I use VNAV is when I'm VFR, because so much of the time when I'm IFR, the ATC instructions are inconsistent with what's set up in the flight plan for the VNAV profile. I love the feature. I just wish I could use it all the time. And here's an email from Mike in Virginia. He says, Max, I'm the chief instructor at Piston to Jet at KHEF. You mentioned us in our test pilot course some time back. Thanks for that. We've since graduated 2 test pilots and 1 test director. I just finished episode 219, and I enjoyed the discussion, especially with respect to spin training. P2J offers an advanced aerodynamics and spin stall prevention course that delves deeply into spins. We use the Diamond DA20. I want to correct a myth that you guys mentioned. Spins do not hasten the demise of gyroscopic instruments. Talk to any high-end avionics shop and they will tell you the same. We have done hundreds of spins in our 6-pack equipped DA20s over the past several years with no adverse effects to the gyros. And as a reference, he mentions Rick Stoll's Stall Spin Awareness book, page 5, myth number 12. TGH Aviation details that there is no risk to damage of gyro instruments caused by spins. Thanks so much for that. And here's an email from Patreon supporter Tim Decker. He says, Hi, Max. I just listened to your podcast episode 224, Controlling Landing Speed with Pitch or Power, and wanted to point out that when one flies an ILS with a flight director, the flight director directs your pitch to stay on glide path, and power is used to control airspeed. This is especially true when the autopilot is engaged. I found it interesting to see this concept totally confuse a young but experienced flight instructor who is awaiting training at a regional airline but has only flown single-engine Cessnas to date. I had the opportunity to fly a Cirrus SR20 with her, and with the autopilot engaged and on an LPV approach, I told her she was slow, but on glide slope, I heard her say pitch for speed, power for glide path. And she did not know what to do since the autopilot was engaged. As you know, the proper correction was simply to add a little power. With so many young pilots going straight from CFI to a regional airline where automation knowledge is mandatory, I recommend that we teach both methods. It even goes so far as to admit that a combination of both methods works well. Well, Tim, you're talking about a different situation from what we were describing. In 224, we were talking about hand flying the final segment of a visual approach. You're talking about a autopilot coupled to ILS approach. Totally different situations, and I agree. If you've got the autopilot engaged and it's following a glide path, then yes, power would be the only option for controlling speed along that glide path. And here's an email from Dan Clapp, longtime listener, big fan, one-time contributor. We'll work on making it 2 times soon. Your podcast achieve exactly what you want. Relevant news to keep pilots excited and engaged about aviation. Like others, I too can't wait for the next episode. I'm a 57-year-old pilot from New Jersey who learned to fly less than 4 years ago. I have 400 hours and just passed my commercial rating, which was the hardest thing I've ever done. Since IFR training was all about autopilots and avionics, I had to learn how to hand fly again and look out the window. It was the best training I ever had. As a reward for my commercial achievement, I treated myself to a 3-day seaplane rating, which I highly recommend. It's the most fun that I've ever had flying. Well, congratulations to you, Dan. And yes, I totally agree with you about seaplane flying. For a number of years, I owned a Lake Buccaneer, and it was great fun to fly that seaplane around. And here's an email from Eric talking about water in fuel tanks in 172. He says, one of the bits of feedback I got while working through the fuel contamination with my client is that there's plenty of guidance out there that, as Paul Bertorelli says, sump the tanks always, but not a lot of guidance on what to do if you find contaminated fuel, particularly contamination due to water. This particular contamination event caused me to go through POHs for the various models of 172s I regularly fly, the M, S, and N models. And it was really interesting to see the changes in the fuel systems over that time and how those changes might have been motivated by fuel contamination events, probably due to water as seals aged. A client of mine was conducting a pre-flight of a 172M aircraft. When I returned to the airplane after conducting my own personal pre-flight, my client asked me to have a look at the fuel sample he had drawn from the nose sump. The color did not look right. It had a much lighter tint of blue than I'd normally expect to see. We dumped the sample into the larger cup we use for wing sumps. In that container, when held against the white paint of the airframe, there was no detectable blue color. It appeared completely clear. Based on this, I concluded we had water in the fuel system. My client took repeated samples from the nose sump until we got an uncontaminated sample. I suggested we gently rock the wings up and down, and then after my client had finished the rest of the pre-flight, sample all the sumps again. About 15 minutes later, these sump samples revealed no contamination. After writing the above, I had the thought to check this process against whatever procedure might be outlined in the POH. I found the following guidance, quote, "Before the first flight of the day and after each refueling, pull out fuel strainer drain knob for about 4 seconds to clear fuel strainer of possible water and sediment. Release drain knob, then check that strainer drain is closed after draining. If water is observed, there is a possibility that the fuel tank sumps contain water. Thus, the fuel tank sump drain plugs and fuel selector valve drain plugs should be removed to check for the presence of water." And he said, "This aircraft has quick drain plugs for each wing sump, which we checked. However, I did not know if it is equipped with a quick drain plug for the fuel selector valve." My questions are, given the above, without removing the fuel selector drain plug to check for the presence of water, would you have flown the airplane? My client pointed me to the advice of one noted aviation author, Rick Durden, who suggests that anything more than a trace of water in one sump that can be removed with a single sample should be investigated by a mechanic and might warrant a purging of the fuel system. Given the facts above, would you advise review by a mechanic or purging of the fuel system? And I wrote back and I said, I agree that there's a lot more written about sumping tanks than is written about what to do once you find water in the fuel. Had I found that much water, I think my inclination would have been to talk with a mechanic, because I haven't seen water in fuel tanks in many years, and because it's just a short walk to reach our club mechanics. I'm not sure what I would have done if I were in a different situation at a remote area where I didn't have easy access to the mechanics. He said, "Thanks, Max, for the feedback. For that much water, the consensus I've gotten is to have a mechanic look at the aircraft. We did fly the airplane, mea culpa, and thankfully did not experience any mechanical issues. After this event, I'm even more attentive to fuel contamination than I was before. I've purchased the fuel testing paper I shared with you and use it anytime I have any doubt about a fuel sample. I now distinguish between a trace of water in the fuel system in more significant amounts and use both the wing rocking and tail lowering method to eliminate water from the fuel system." And for anyone whose email that I haven't gotten back to, boy, I apologize, but I have literally been flying 7 days a week for the past 4 weeks, and I am pretty far behind on email, I might say. But hopefully you've heard your answer here on the show. And I want to take a moment to recognize some really special people. Let me talk about our brand new Patreon supporters and see if you know any of these superheroes who signed up to help keep this show up and running. Nathan Ballard edited his pledge up to $20 a month. Michael McRobert joined the show as a new member at $20 a month. Chase Hogg edited his pledge up to $20 a month. And Jason Turacek down in Australia, I believe, edited up to the $8 a month, which is the Australian $10 a month level. And also Martin Miller, who signed up at the $20 a month level. We also have one new monthly supporter via PayPal. That's Joel Jackson at the $5 a month level. And of course, if you sign up to become a member and support the show, we'll read your name on the show. It's really easy to sign up. The best way to do it is go out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome. That'll take you to our Patreon site where you can use a credit card, see what the different dollar levels are and what the different little goodies are that we'll offer you at the various dollar levels. For example, at the $20 a month level, you get to view all of the videos that I post, including the most recent trip into Jackson Hole in the Vision Jet. You can also support us via PayPal, either monthly or as a one-time donation, by going out to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And I want to thank everyone who supports the show, whether you do it by sending emails, leaving great reviews on your podcast player about this show, or hopefully encouraging all of your friends to listen to this show. Thank you so very much. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.